to order. Jerry's the only one not here, and he may be on his way. Before we get into the meeting, I would like to remind the commissioners that the microphone, keep it close to you. It's the closest thing to your heart tonight. So,
Even I have a better life.
just remember the microphone because the helps with the communication and the video. Has everybody gotten a chance to look at the July 12th, 2017 minutes of the Planning Commission? And if so, do I hear a motion for acceptance?
So moved.
Do I hear a second?
Second. I better turn it on.
All in favor of accepting the July 12th, 2017 Planning Commission meeting minutes as written, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, that's moved. At this time is the appearance of interested citizens. This time is made available for those who wish to speak about an issue that is not on the agenda tonight. Do we have anybody? Or is everybody here for the agenda item? Okay. Moving right on. Tonight, we are going to have a public hearing on the text amendment for section 2.308, so I will open the hearing for that. Staff.
Well, sign codes are hard. We are here basically tonight because of a little bit of shifting ground in that the Supreme Court has been busying themselves, and I'll try to keep my editorial comments to a minimum. But so we have the Reed versus Gilbert decision, which basically comes out of Gilbert, Arizona. It's without going into detail on the decision, basically instructed us all that all of our sign codes have to be absolutely content neutral. Now, that's all fine and well. I'll be good. So we have gone through this, our sign code, and tried to identify those things which are in obvious opposition to that instruction. A couple of things come to mind really easily, and that's, for example, we regulate real estate signs, we regulate political signs. Those are content driven. So how we're going to do this is I would like to set the stage here a little bit, give a little bit of background, help you guys try to put all this in context. So the more seasoned members will look and be able to remember some of this context that we're going to talk about. Then Shane is basically going to go through the high points of the specific recommendations that we are presenting to you tonight. So the sign code, in my mind, it's a little bit like a thermostat. Now, I've been married for going on, well, a lot of years. And we have an issue with, my wife likes to make major adjustments in the thermostat. And I keep trying to, over all of these years, I think I've gotten her to making small adjustments. Now, the sign code is incredibly complex. It's incredibly ingrained in our business community. It's a basic need of the community. So every adjustment that we make has ramifications. And so when we make adjustments, there are ramifications to those adjustments. Now, the main objectives of any sign code is that we need identification of place and we need balanced visual access to the public. We need fairness and equity. We can't favor one kind of group over another kind of group, depending on simply content or those kinds of things. We also need to have uniform enforcement. We can't just focus on, well, I'm going to go after the swim teams of this, and not really going to pay attention to the others. Our enforcement program has got to be equitable. And it also has to be possible to do with our resources. So the enforceability of it, the understandability of it, and the common sense nature of a person, the person running their business has to be able to understand what it is we're doing. And I've got to tell you, some sign codes are incredibly involved and arcane. And you would take an attorney or some sort of tax accountant to be able to figure out some jurisdiction sign codes. So our effort is to make this straightforward and to make it something that everybody can understand and that is enforceable. So some of the proposals that you will see here are driven because we have very limited, we basically have a half-time code enforcement person that is dedicated to the development code. He spends about half of his time doing police kinds of things and half of his time doing code enforcement of the development code. We can go on about that, but just leave it at that. So everything that we do has to be with that context in mind. I think it would be irresponsible to create a sign code program that was complex and that would require a heavy enforcement arm in order to implement. So what we've proposed to you tonight is something that is intended to be administratable and understandable. So now here in Keizer, in the early days of Keizer, sign clutter was a big issue. It was a mess. And those of you who have long history in this community know that it was a mess. I'd be interested to find some historical photographs, but I think we would all be aghast at what it used to be. So even before we had a development code, way back in 1990, the sign ordinance was established. And it was established with a lot of work and a lot of understanding about this new city and what kind of ideal did we want to create? What kind of image did we want to create? My hat is off to those people that established the sign code way back when. They set the pattern, they set the direction. The urban renewal program was implemented to bring signs into compliance. So there was a heavy investment by this community in getting the sign program into conformance with the goals and objectives that were established way back when. There were aesthetic ideals that were established with that process. And there are aesthetic ideals that are continued to be enforced. We had the first sign code that set a standard. We had the urban renewal program that implemented it. We had land use restrictions. We have the River Road Renaissance program that established some design standards and guidelines, and we had other things. Safety is always a concern, but it's one of many issues, and it's addressed through a various array of regulations that we have in our code. So, in my mind, sign code is a statement of a community vision. It's a statement about a community identity. It's an ideal that we try to create to balance all of these competing issues and interests in our community. One of my favorite examples is Utah. Utah had a statewide marketing program, and they said, Utah, a pretty great state. Now, I'm sure they were trying to put a comma in there that it was pretty and great, but the reality is it came across as it's a pretty great state, as in okay. And every time I drive, and I go frequently, I have 2 daughters that live in Utah. Every time I drive there, I am aghast at the number of billboards that there are from from borderline to borderline. And in my mind, that creates a statement about what do they think of themselves? What is their vision? And to be honest with you, it's a beautiful country, but you cannot see it past the billboards. So, I mean, I dare you to take a nice picturesque photograph from the freeway. So, the sign code is a statement about who we believe ourselves to be as a community. Now, so there's a various range of approaches, and different jurisdictions approach it differently. If you take, for example, electronic message centers, different jurisdictions approach it differently. There are some notable examples of jurisdictions that prohibit them outright, Bend being one of them. Some of them limit the frequency to long periods, like ours. Currently, it's at 15 minutes. Wilsonville is also at 15 minutes. I think Oregon City only allows the message to be changed 3 times in an entire day, 24-hour period. Some have a rigorous public hearing process in order to simply place an electronic message center. And some allow frequent changes. Salem allows theirs to be changed in commercial zones to be changed 8 seconds. In residential zones, I think it's an hour. Some even allow animation on their electronic message centers. So this proposal that you have in front of you tonight has been, I can tell you, it has been agonized over on our level, trying to create a balanced approach that preserves the goals and ideals and all of those kinds of things, the aesthetic standards, the fairness to business, the enforceability, those things we have given careful consideration. Some of the things I think we know you are going to want to adjust. And I'm thinking of political signs. Right now, we're simply saying that's the decision, so we're just simply eliminating the category. In reality, we have elections, and we have multiple people for office. So there are some things I know you're going to want to actually have some discussion about. So with that, we have tried to incorporate into our proposal a balanced approach and incorporating some of the additional needs of businesses. You may not agree with our proposal. We have met with the chamber and we've received input from the Chamber of Commerce. We value that and we have tried to respond to that. We're not in agreement with all of their requests, but we have tried to incorporate some of the things which they have pointed out to us. And we have tried to create a realistic enforcement program. For example, the 120 days is just simply not enforceable. We have no stopwatch. We have no ability to tell when that sign actually went in and when is the time clock tick and those kinds of things. So with that, then I will turn it over to Shane, and he's going to walk through the specific, I think he's going to use your staff report as a basis to walk through those changes.
Thank you, Nate. Yeah, so as Nate said, we bringing forward a draft that started out as trying to be very, very just simple, surgical, Reed Gilbert oriented, but because of some of the key issues in Reed Gilbert for, you know, the categorical signs, it kind of just created this snowball. But overwhelmingly, the one thing that I did want to say, I think Nate mentioned this early on as he was talking, what we really felt like here in Keizer is that, and I think Jim, you had emailed us at one point, let's be careful of mission creep. And I appreciate that comment, Jim. But, you know, really our sign code is not that broken currently. Personally, I've worked for the city forever. Not forever, but for a very long time, like close to 20 years. And I have enforced the sign code for over 16 years at the city of Keizer. My daughter turned 16 this year, and I was the code enforcement officer when she was born. So I'm very familiar with the sign code, and I mostly hate it. But I'm also very keenly aware on some of the struggles we've had as a city of equitably enforcing that code, and also hearing business owners who generally don't like when I'm playing the role of enforcement person. It's never the funnest of times. So we did try to hear some of those things that were spoke. And so, primarily in the memo I sent you guys, kind of the bullets spell out what we're doing. We're trying to eliminate much of the readability, the clarification, and the categorical issues. I did include some language that I don't know if Shannon's going to talk about or not, but there's a bunch of stuff in our sign code that, because the sign code was adopted in 1990, prior to the development code that we currently use in 98, there was a bunch of amortization language that all uses these dates of 1997. And forever, I have always thought that that was maybe one of the strangest things to live in the development code. So most of that I propose to strike, just get it out of the code, because it doesn't make sense to me. Shanna reminded me I am not a lawyer. So some of that language may have to stay or be modified. And I don't know if, as I said, I don't know if Shanna wants to speak to that tonight, but I know there's some question marks there. If you guys have some distinct questions about that amortization language, the stuff at the beginning that we're trying to get rid of, if you have major concerns, again, I'd urge you to bring them up, but just know that I think that's going to look a little different after Shannon gets into it and says, Shane, don't mess with stuff too much.
How we just get that out of the
Yeah,
way.
it's just you.
Do you want to talk about that now?
Sure. So I'll take that comment a while back as a compliment, because I helped draft the sign code. So that's how long I've been around. So I got married in 1990, the same year we adopted the sign code. And it was one of those things that often happens, just using marrying counties. We're a city, we don't have an so we just said, okay, well, we hereby say Marion County sign, which was, it was a nothing. It was hardly any regulations at all. Overnight, a billboard popped up next to Taco Bell, which we call the Taco Bell billboard, which is now gone, by the way, and I won't go into the story about how that disappeared. A lot of work by Nate, I think, as I recall, a few years back. But that sign went up, and oh my gosh, how could that sign be allowed? Well, because we're using the county's sign code, which allows just about everything. And I can tell you that the signs at that time were very cluttered and large. The McDonald's sign at that time, and I'm sorry to hijack this, but I have my notes, I'm going to do it all now. And I'll get back to the amortization thing in a minute. The McDonald's sign was like a highway size sign. It had to be at least 50 feet in the air and 150 square feet or more. It was huge. And so, as Nate pointed out, the urban renewal was along the same time, and they said you have 7 years to that amortization period to comply for permanent signs. And by the way, if you get your rear end gear and change your signs businesses, we will pay half of the city used. We will pay half the cost, and these signs are not cheap. We will pay half the cost in urban renewal to do it. So we had the carrot and the stick, which is like, you have to change it by 1997, and you better do it by 97 because the money goes away. We're not gonna pay you after 1997, so you need to do it. And we had incredible amount of compliance because of that. The amortization, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but I don't want there to be, I guess I'll just leave it at this and not to be mysterious or anything. I don't want to change anything in the amortization language that changes possible enforcement actions against particularly any billboards, but also any illegal signs accidentally. That's not the intent, I don't think. And so I'm going to need to kind of play with this a little bit in terms of how that language works, as Shane implied, and we'll be coming back at the next meeting with some of those suggestions. The only other thing, since Nate gave me the floor, the third thing that I was going to mention, in my position as city attorney, I try, like the Dickens, not to suggest policy. So I'm not going to suggest policy to you with regard to your, it's a political decision in a way, a legislative decision the council will ultimately make on how big, small, flashy or non-flashy, or how often flashy the signs get, how many there might be. But I will say this, because I've dealt with the sign code off and on over many years. Be careful about loosening something with the idea that, well, if it doesn't work, we can go back and make it tight again. That if you decide to relax any regulations, know that they're just going to be relaxed. It's extremely difficult to, you can tighten regulations and then go the other way, but once you've loosened regulations to make them less restrictive and more liberal, if you want to use the term, it is very difficult to go back again. You have signs that are already existing. They have significant costs. Now the new businesses that come in, if you try to make it restrictive again, say, wait a minute, what about these signs? That was the beauty of the sign code back then, because by 1997, everybody was on the same page. And that's one of the things that I have heard from, not directly from businesses themselves. They like pretty loose sign codes for the most part. But really what businesses like is a fair sign code, so they know that their competitors are on the same playing field. And so I would caution you, be careful, and don't expect that you can, just, if it doesn't, let's try this. Because I had that almost exact comment from a counselor or two many years ago. Well, I think we should try X, whatever the particular part of the sign code was, and we'll just kind of revisit it in a couple of years. I just suggested against that. If you think it's just too restrictive, and you don't have any question about it, and you understand it's going to stay the way you change it, then that's fine. That's your folks' decision in the council. So sorry to get on my soapbox. I wanted to make sure I got those points in. So, and let me know if you have any more questions about the amortization. I'll try to make it muddier later.
All right, so as I said, in the memo, I tried to kind of outline in bullet points what the changes would result in. I would be happy to walk kind of through those changes text-wise so we can talk them through. The sign code is a little bit confusing because it bounces you around a little. So sometimes you look at one thing and then you go, oh, well, then what about this? What about this? What about this? But essentially what we were doing with the proposed changes, the non-conforming amortization language stuff that Shannon talked about, that was one of them. There are some minor changes for readability and clarification, grammar kind of stuff. We are a substantive change in the code, although not 100% from an applicability perspective, is the definition of area. Previously, we defined an area if it wasn't like a box sign or a sign in a well, whatever I would call it, a box sign, channel letters or a sign that had individual elements. You would have to enclose it in a parallelogram or a triangle. And those are the only two geometric shapes you could use. You couldn't use a circle or anything else. So we're proposing to change that you can enclose them in any standard geometric shape up to 2 connected geometric shapes. So that way if you have a sign that has large text in channel letters and smaller text in channel letters, the old code would have made you put a big box around all of it and a lot of dead space that would effectively, it's not sign area. So we're trying to change that, which is more in line with most model codes and frankly the way a lot of jurisdictions do it. So that's one of the substantive changes. The other thing is with the elimination of the content-based sign types, as Nate alluded to, and he spoke to the 2 primary ones that are of issue, real estate signs and election type signs. We're also proposing to eliminate the categories for government signs, for nonprofit signs, basically anything that has a category based on the message. We're eliminating and simply saying, hey, we've got temporary signs and we've got portable signs. It doesn't matter what they say, because as sign enforcement people, we're not supposed to read them anyway because of the First Amendment. So we're hoping that the text is getting us where we need to go. I allude at the end of the memo, I recognize this is a draft. So my feelings will not be hurt to be critical of the language, because this was a super difficult piece of text to grab a hold of and to try to modify and catch all of the nuances. And again, that's a guy who's literally been enforcing this code for over a decade, and it was still super hard for me to figure out what makes sense and what doesn't. The other big change that we're proposing has to do with the temporary and the portable signs. And just from a quick, easy way to look at it, previously forever we've always had two categories for temporary and portable signs. Back in 2008, when we did this last go round of sign code changes, prior to 2008, A-frame signs were not allowed within the city of Keizer. That was a big change to start allowing A-frames. We allowed signs on a frame, we allowed signs that were self-supporting and movable, but A-frames we didn't technically allow. And so we started allowing A-frames, and we changed the categories a little, because temporary signs were generally just banners. Also in 2008, the wind feather or the feather flag signs had become popular. So feather flag signs didn't fit anywhere normal, and they got slid in actually on the council floor to be a temporary sign. So we've had this weird dynamic for almost 10 years where a banner on a building or a corrugated plastic or rigid sign attached to a building or a freestanding sign support or a feather flag are all considered temporary signs and are allowed to be 16 square feet in area and be displayed for 120 days per property, one per property. And then portable signs had this other category that said portable signs are 6 square feet in area. They're A-frames, they're yard signs, they're signs on a frame, or they're meant to be movable. And if they're within 10 feet of a building entrance, you can have them all the time. If they're not within 10 feet of a building entrance, you're limited to 120 days. They can't be in the public right-of-way or on a public sidewalk. They have to be on the private property side of a sidewalk regardless of property line location. And they have to be 50 feet apart. And so from an enforcement perspective, really hard to deal with. And we go out and one sign's in violation, well, all signs are in violation, and then who gets to have a sign? And we have a lot of businesses say that's not fair, and we say, we know, talk to your landlord, I don't know what to tell you. And it just creates a major issue. So what we're proposing to do is moving the feather flags into portable signs, because it really is more of a portable sign. And we're proposing to allow each storefront or residence to have a portable sign, regardless. We have left language in to create a 10-foot separation. We had thrown around the idea of going no separation requirement, but based on stacking and all of that, at 10 feet, signs have to be really close together, and it will be fairly easy to tell from an enforcement perspective whether or not signs are closer than 10 feet apart, because that's 2 sidewalk panels. So we're proposing 10 feet, but again, we're expecting some input from you guys. And then temporary signs, we are proposing those to still maintain the 120 days, but the big difference would be as a temporary sign will only be considered a sign that is attached to a building now. So it's going to be a banner, it's going to be a rigid sign that's attached. And those, from an enforcement perspective, it's much easier for, sounded weird. It's easier for us to track a sign attached to a building as opposed to an A-frame that comes out and gets moved around and, oh, was that the A-frame that was out yesterday or last week, or is it a different A-frame? So anyway, so that's our reasoning of leaving that 120-day window. Again, we were trying to take a small bite and not completely rewrite the sign code. I toyed with it, but it was one of those things where it's really not that broken. When you drive up and down River Road, yeah, there are times where signs have multiplied like rabbits and it looks kind of bad, but for the most part, it isn't the worst thing. The other significant thing we've done with the temporary and the portable signs is we're adding a whole section, because we've heard for a long time, and most recently with a meeting that we had with Danielle Bethel from the chamber, and Jonathan was there, and Carlos. And we had a meeting talking about the need for businesses to be able to have events for grand openings or other special events. So we're proposing some language for special events to allow them by a permit only, which basically the way the language reads is that if you want to do a combination of temporary and portable signs, the sideboards are off, you got 14 days to go crazy. And you can do it twice a year, and events can't be more than, they have to be at least 30 days apart, and you can have, 2 in a 365-day in a calendar year. So basically it would give the businesses an opportunity to do that. The other piece, because of real estate signs, our code used to regulate it where a real estate sign for commercial properties could be 16 square feet, and residences are 6. Well, with the change of portable signs, we don't want all portable signs to be 16 square feet. We'd like them to stay at 6 like they've always been, with the exception of the feather flags. And so what we're proposing is that for a portable sign of up to 16 square feet, you may get a permit that's good for up to 120 days, and that it would be one per property is the way we wrote the language. And specifically the idea there, even though it's completely content neutral, because it has to be content neutral, the idea there is that if there's a complex that's commercial property and they want to have a commercial real estate sign, they will still be able to do that. We'll just be doing it through a permitting process so we can track it. So that's kind of the significant elements of the changes to the temporary and the portable signs. Yeah.
So one other aspect is we're proposing that temporary signs, no, portable signs, have the ability, one per storefront, which means in a place like Keizer Plaza, that we're not trying to discern who has the right to place a sign, because we have, I'm not sure, but I think there's like 12 businesses in that location, with the 2 driveways and with the plaza that was created through urban renewal. There's very little opportunity for people to place a sign. And so, and it's actually been an ongoing battle that how do we differentiate who is there first and who has the right to do what? So what we're proposing is this spacing is down to 10 feet, that there would be one per storefront. You have to have a physical presence because some businesses have 16 different DBAs, and we're saying one per physical location. And we're also saying that they have the right to they can place them there ongoing, not a 120-day limit. So I think Shane, I may have been drifting, but so I think that's important to note, that we're talking about allowing them all year long. Now, the good news is we have actually inventoried the number of storefronts that we have, and we have around almost 300 different storefronts along from Lock Haven to our city limits on the south. The reality is the total number of temporary signs is around 100. So not all businesses put out temporary signs. Not all businesses use that as their methodology. Now I know that as we have talked about it amongst staff and the private Shannon, for example, is concerned about sign clutter. Having that history and having that background, that's one of the issues. Are we going to multiply the number of sign clutter out along River Road? And is it going to get back to those old days where nobody wants to go back to that point? But in counting and inventorying, we don't think that it's going to be a much larger impact than what we currently have. So I just wanted to add that as clarification. Sorry.
No, it's fine. The other substantive piece that we are proposing to change is regarding the electronic message centers, which have already been alluded to way more tonight than we really probably need to. But in 2008, we started allowing EMCs, electronic message centers, in Keizer. We didn't allow them before that, except for time and temperature by a conditional use permit. And in 2008, we began to allow them. And so we have a few along River Road now, and we have standards around those. We are proposing to change. Right now, it's only allowed as a freestanding sign. Our language is proposing to allow, if a business owner so chose, they could propose to do an EMC as a wall sign. They'd still be subject to the same review criteria that they are now and same standards for reduction in overall size, things like that. We heard from pretty much the get-go, and frankly, every single conditional use permit I have approved, I believe I have had to contact the owners of the site and the business who installed the sign and tell them when the sign first goes up, hey, you cannot flash or animate or scroll or blink or do this with your sign. You're limited to a static message changing once every 15 minutes. It's right in the conditions, and if you don't change it right away, we're going to write you a ticket. And so I've had to call pretty much everybody. And that's something that we've consistently heard from the business community. Well, that's just ridiculous. It's way too long, yada, yada, yada. Nate alluded to the fact that we have looked at a lot of sign codes around the state of Oregon, and it's kind of all around, all over the board as to what they allow. It's funny, there's some emails in our stuff that are part of the packet. James Carpenter, who is representative of the International Sign Association, which, according to their own literature, they are there to represent the interests of sign companies. But he was actually really helpful. I had a nice conversation with him on the phone. He pointed out some great things in his email, which is part of the packet, most of which we actually incorporated in one way or another, some of which I just don't agree with him on, and is straight up just his opinion versus someone else's opinion. But other things were helpful. The Reed Gilbert stuff was very helpful. A couple things he pointed out that I had originally missed as being content-based. But a lot of folks have quoted like an 8-second time frame as this gold standard. And while Salem has 8 seconds, and the model sign code from ISA recommends 8 seconds, but it actually recommends 8 or less seconds depending on what kind of district it's in, and in some cases more than 8. Basically, even the ISA and the United States Sign Council folks admit the fact that if you're talking about straight safety only, there's a lot of studies that have been done. But when it comes to aesthetics and what a community wants, it really is across the board as to what people want. We are proposing with this amendment to drop the time frame to once every 60 seconds, which is a huge reduction of what we have had for the past almost 10 years. We feel that it's very generous to the business community. It allows them to get multiple messages out 60 messages per hour. At the same time, in looking at the lineal nature of River Road and living here and driving River Road on a regular basis, we also feel that at a minute, while you may see some signs changing faces and things like that, we don't feel that it's going to result in this massive flashing of River Road. Just when you kind of run the stopwatch and drive, and again, I am not a scientist, clearly, I'm a land use planner, but a very unscientific approach that I have taken of just driving River Road and kind of looking and going, okay, how many times would I see a sign change? And yeah, I'd see it a little bit, but it wouldn't be this egregious, Vegas or Times Square kind of feel. So that's the other piece that we're proposing to change with the EMCs, is dropping that down to 60 seconds. And then the other piece we have is right now for signs that are in public zones, they're actually limited to once every 24 hours. So the fire district only gets to put one message up a day. McNary, one message a day. And we're basically proposing to say, you know what, they're the same as everyone else. They can have the same frequency of change. So those are the proposed changes. Oh, then there's one other proposed change that I did want to point out. We really didn't touch a lot with our permanent sign program. It really was more about temporary signs and the little bit of the EMC shift. We did add some language to allow secondary frontage signs for all business types. That was something that got added in secondary frontage signs, but they were only allowed for integrated centers. And it's never rang very true, and it's a little bit unfair to a business owner that owns their own property. And the impact to the community is really based on the frontage upon which the building fronts a public street or a parking area. So yeah, thanks, Nate. Yeah, so sorry, I work with the sign code all the time. So currently our overall sign allocation for businesses is based on the lineal frontage of a building. So if you have a building that's 100 feet wide, you can have signage up to 150 feet because it's a 1.5 times the lineal frontage, capping at 150 feet of signage. So the secondary language that was added some years back allowed to designate one specific wall as a secondary frontage. So if you're a building on a corner lot and you have two public street frontages, you can put a primary sign on your primary frontage, or you can split up that allowed area on two sides if you want it towards a parking lot. But you can designate one secondary frontage, and you take that frontage and you multiply it by 0.75 up to a maximum of 75 square feet.
And these are wall signs only.
Yeah, only wall signs, not for freestanding signs. So we're proposing to allow that in both an integrated center and a non-integrated center. I will just say that primarily where we saw that utilized and what pushed that forward was the Keizer Station development. And frankly, it doesn't really seem that fair that Keizer Station development would get more wall signage than businesses on River Road, especially a standalone business. So we feel like it's more equitable, it makes more sense, and so that's the other add that we're having that's in the red text. The other thing I wanted to say is, with the packet, there was a lot of information. We had the text. My memo was 2 pages long, sorry. I tried to make it as short as I could. We had the emails that the chamber got as they sent out, which was great input. I think there was 7 emails, if I remember right, or 6, 7. Thank you. And most of them actually were fairly positive. We feel that the things that we're proposing do kind of speak to those emails to an extent. I also included Mr. Carpenter's email to me. I don't necessarily agree with his assessment of certain pieces of our code, specifically that our 1.5 is way too low. I have to say this, but my quick argument to that is just simply that we have a lot of businesses in Keizer who've invested a lot of money on signs, and they've employed a lot of sign companies to build them signs based on our standards. And I personally would hate to see us change permanent sign standards to up them to some larger national level and have all these business owners who have just been constantly investing signs in their business all of a sudden go, oh, now everybody else can have more signs than us and we're out thousands and thousands of dollars. So that bothers me. And the other thing is it's a standard that's literally been in place for as long as I've worked here, and nobody ever really complains about it, other than.
Well, and by their own admission, it's also a wide variation,
Right.
and depending on community standard.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, their desire doesn't necessarily represent what our community standard is.
And with that, the other piece, I included 2 little pieces of literature regarding nits, which is the argument of illuminance and luminance. So it's basically the difference between the light shining off of a sign versus the brightness of the sign at its face. So there's kind of a move in the industry, according to the International Sign Association, although when I talked to Mr. Carpenter, I asked him, well, why does it seem that the United States Sign Council is still looking at it as nits? And so that's something that I actually would like to get your guys' input on. I did not feel that I had done adequate research on our end to have a strong position to say, no, we want to change to using the lux measurement, the foot candles measurement versus the nits. We've been using the nits, which is a candelas per square meter measurement, which is pretty standard in the manufacturing industry of signs. But using a foot candles measurement, there is some indication in the documents I provided you guys that may be actually easier for us to enforce and to regulate and to measure, a lot cheaper to measure. So for me, the jury's still out. The one thing I will say is I did a little research, looked at a few different cities, one of them being Salem, and the day before the packet was due is when I had my conversation with Mr. Carpenter when he called me. And he was the one that actually indicated to me that, oh, well, actually, there's some proposed changes that are going to go to Salem City Council. Well, they weren't on the city's website when I looked at them before. And I was like, oh, they're still nits. Maybe, nits is the way to stay. They are proposing, and we'll see what happens. It's supposed to go to Salem Council in August. They are proposing to change to the lumens measurement and using foot candles as a measurement and using a lux meter. All I'll say is that we haven't really had a lot of problems with the brightness of the EMCs. There's been a couple that have gone up and they've been really bright, and we've gotten complaints. And so we've called business owners and said, hey, we received a complaint. Seems like your sign's awfully bright at night. oh, let me check on that. And they look and they go, you know what? I turned that down. You're right. It was set up too bright. So, that's something that I would like to see or hear some conversation about, is if what the important things are to you guys, I guess, on that. We don't want the signs to be too bright. How we measure them, I guess, is a little bit up in the air. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions or respond to any of the other things. I don't really want to systematically go through all the emails and the comments we received, because I'm happy to talk about them, but anyway. So there you go.
Michael.
You were talking earlier about, it's hard to track what 120 days is. Did people or currently, do a business have to tell you, we're putting up so it's just they put it up, and then you would have to have been the one paying attention that it was up?
Right. And Michael, one of the things, just as an aside, I have personally talked for a long time about, well, maybe we should just implement a full-on permitting process for all temporary and portable signs. Some other jurisdictions do that. A lot of jurisdictions have phased those out because they've been problematic over the years. Salem's proposed changes are eliminating their requirements for some of their sign permits for temporary signs. And I think what's hard, and actually sitting down and chatting with Danielle and Jonathan and Carlos at the meeting we had with them regarding kind of the sign code, really affected my thinking on that. From a budgetary and a resource perspective, in order to implement a true tracking program and have the manpower to do either a sticker system, or even if you're just doing a simple spreadsheet or whatever of the addresses, and then going out and inspecting those to make sure that they're going away, it eats up a lot of time. And so in order to recapture that resource, where we already don't frankly have enough resources for code enforcement and all the different things that we do hit the city, I think that the permit fees would have to be pretty high. And I don't think that our business community wants to pay a bunch of permit fees to put out A-frames. But that would be definitely an option, and it's something we did talk about, and ultimately went with hey, it's really not broken, so let's make it a little better for us, hopefully better for everybody. So.
And I wasn't thinking of a full permit. I was just thinking some type of, you said, spreadsheet, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we have some people that would like to talk on this subject, and I'd like to hear from them. Is the mics all set up? Okay, perfect. An old friend of this commission, Jonathan Thompson.
It's kind of weird to be down here. Chair Sangster and members of the Planning Commission, my name is Jonathan Thompson. I'm a business owner here in Keizer. I live here in Keizer, and I'm a member of the Keizer Chamber Board of Directors and also the chair of our Government Affairs Committee. And I'm here today to go through some of the feedback we received from our members about these proposed changes. In general, we agree with and support much of what staff is proposing. And we very much appreciate Nate and his team for reaching out to us and being proactive and asking for our input. That was great, so thank you for that. After our meeting with city staff, we reached out for feedback from our members, and you have a lot of that feedback in your packets. But there's five or 4 points I wanted to touch on this morning, or this evening. The first having to do with temporary signs. There was a request from some folks about temporary signs for nonprofits, which, moving to content neutral, I don't know that's feasible. So, but
We're all ears.
yeah, no, in speaking with Nate after that, it seems that concern could be addressed as a temporary, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I could put a temporary sign in front of my business that advertised youth soccer, as long as, I don't have one in front of it now, so I could do something like that, and that would be allowed. And staff was concerned about obviously signs in the right of way, and I don't believe that's what we were asking about. So And also, there was a request to require temporary signs to be unbroken and clean, which I believe the code will speak to. Obviously, we don't want River Road cluttered with broken down signs. And then also, our members wanted to make sure that any changes made the code simpler and also kept fees as low as possible. And I think that we can agree that we're moving in that direction. But finally, an area where we think the ordinance can be improved, and that has to do with the length of time between changes on electronic signs. We had quite a bit of feedback, both in writing and from our members, just in speaking with them, about dropping the change from its current 15 minutes to 8 seconds, which we understand is the national average. And I also believe and you can consider the source, but I also believe there's information in your packet about the safety aspect of that 8-second change. And one of the reasons that I think folks are wanting the 8 seconds is, I think we saw this summer when the Keizer police went up and down River Road, and they requested that businesses put up signs advertising the police funding forum that was hosted here. And I think it would be, for me as a business owner, a lot easier sell to post something like that in a rotation that was every 8 seconds with my message than it would be if I had to leave the sign on for 15 minutes. And for 15 minutes, I couldn't post a message for my business. And I think that's also there's a email in your packet from Keizer Fire Chief Cowan, who the way I read it, he would like to be able to use their sign to put more frequent messages on it. So, and we figure, hey, if 8 seconds is good enough for a bull ride, it should be good enough for a sign. So. But in summary, the Keizer Chamber supports most of the proposal before you. Like I said, we'd like to keep the sign code simple and fair and make sure that the signs are well maintained, but we'd also ask that you lower the time from the current 15 minutes down to the 8 seconds. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Any questions from the commission? Again, thank you. You're always welcome.
All right, thank you. I don't envy your decision.
Carlos Pineda?
I think he's here just for the agenda.
Okay. Hope we're putting on a good show tonight. Justin Brealey? Briley. Good evening.
Good evening. All right, I'm Justin Briley. I'm a new store owner here in Keizer, of Keizer Mart. And my wife and I reside in West Salem. Our store has been kind of put up with some interesting challenges taking over the place for one, and just running into some things that kind of make us hard to see. And signs is one of the primary things that helps us get out there, so people know who they're passing by right there. We have some challenges as far as trees and various things that are right in front of our business. So we have secondary signs that we're having out there to kind of let people know that you're kind of passing a store, especially when you're coming from the Lock Haven direction. You don't know what you're passing, especially if you're not from the area. You just go right on past because unless you happen to catch in your rearview mirror, you don't know you just passed a store. Coming from the other direction, they will see our side frontage, I guess you would call it, the parking lot side, that were there. So we have various little signs out there, or did, and we were unaware that there was any kind of restriction as to how many we could have, or that we couldn't really have any at all. And then I later found out that we had to share amongst everyone in there. And I'm just kind of like, holy cow, there's 12 of us. Everyone has their own vested interest in their business and want to promote it. Especially the ones that are kind of tucked back behind, the bronze statue and all the other things back there. You can't see them much either. So naturally, they're going to want to get their stuff close to the road as well. And so it kind of becomes a neighbor battle because I had no idea people were upset that I was putting signs out. Um, so I get a letter from Keizer saying, hey, you need to take those down. Your people around you are upset about it. I'm like, oh. Obviously, no one came up and talked to me about it. And they may not, and they may eventually, because I'm friends with some of the people in there. Keizer is a very warming environment. It's very nice to have a business here. The community has been very just kind of embraced us and made us feel at home in it. But I think the way the sign program is now, it's really building a lot of angst amongst every business for itself at this point. It's what it's kind of turned into. And that's just in the 4 months that I've been there and had the business, and then finding out about this sign code. It's what it's really shown me is that this sign code as it's put for at least a plaza doesn't work. It works for an individual business like a McDonald's or a Sherry's. I mean, they got their own real estate. They speak for themselves. But you got 12 people, multiple owners staring at each other like, well, I want to sign today, and so that's kind of where I'm at. I'm kind of in a rock and a hard space because of, again, some of the greenery around my business, and then now this sign, it kind of puts us in a pickle. So we want to be successful for Keizer. We want to be a positive footprint in the community, and the ability to have some of those few issues fixed that I'm dealing with would definitely lend towards that.
Shane, wouldn't the proposal kind of help his situation?
Yeah, Hirsch, that is one thing. Actually, it's hard. And Justin, I don't think you and I have talked on the phone, but I think you've talked to other people in our office. I don't know that you and I have. I can't remember, but the Keizer Plaza is one of the primary locations that we've had trouble over the years and felt kind of bad as enforcement folks, because if the one guy puts his sign out first, you barely have 50 feet of frontage there. So again, we didn't drop it down to just a sign free for all with the proposed language. We are still looking to get a 10-foot separation and one per business. But theoretically, and I think actually 5 feet from a property line, because Shannon pointed out my non-thinking of doubling up signs at property lines. So, I mean, ultimately, in 100 feet, you could have 10 signs, or 9, I guess, is how it would really work out. But so it would help Keizer Plaza quite a bit. I don't know that it would solve everything 100%, but what we are proposing is a relaxing of what the current standard is. So.
Jim?
So for someone that's lived here for over 30 years, what's the address, or where is Keizer Mart, and where is this multi-tenant project?
You know where Starbucks and Dutch Brothers are?
Mm-hmm.
Right across the street.
Okay,
We stare at it.
Yeah.
it's that place.
Yeah.
Auntie's, yeah, that's the
All
place.
Stars is in there.
Correct. Cricket
Yeah.
Wireless is in
Yeah,
there.
so
Those are the two
4900
that most people
block or
know
whatever road.
about.
Okay, and then second question, I guess, for staff, is that project allowed a freestanding sign that could have all the tenants on the sign face?
They do, they have one, but again, they're limited in space. And so basically, it was implemented by the previous owner. I'm not sure the color scheme is the best, but it is uniform, and basically it is just the title. So, and because there are 12, and I think actually more, possible to even more, you have this, and it's a yellow face, it's a bright sign, but it just has the list of names on it, which is very tough as you're driving down. It's very tough to distinguish.
And for the, it's kind of a U-shaped building, isn't it? And
Yep.
so the end tenants that have,
Fortune cookie used to be
well,
years ago.
That's true, Gary. That's right.
Yeah.
my wife and I of 50 years have this thing about trying not to spend money unnecessarily. So we don't go to a lot of places that other people might frequent regularly in the city. So the two end tenants, they would be able to have wall signs. So that's 2 of the 12, and then that leaves the other 10, and then they've got a freestanding sign, and then knowing that not all businesses want temporary signs or portable signs or whatever they're going to be called now, not everybody in there would necessarily want something out on the front that would be 10 feet from another sign out on the front. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, Jim, you're right. They all have wall signs. There is a monument sign that advertises the complex. There is a pretty significant streetscaping along the frontage, which Justin alluded to. But yeah, I mean, really the changes we're proposing is not anything to our permanent sign program, but it's just simply the temporary and portable signs that we're looking at the modifications.
And so their freestanding sign is as big a sign face as they're allowed to have?
I don't know that off the top of my head. I kind of doubt it, thinking of how large it is. I mean, it's an integrated center, so the freestanding sign could be as much as 100 square feet for the whole complex.
Yeah.
I don't think it's that big, but honestly, I don't
'Cause
I don't
would
know off
think
the top of my head.
they would want to have a sign as big as allowed. Granted, it might
Right.
cost a few bucks, but split between 12 tenants plus the owner, if he wants to
Sure.
have his tenants happy.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably Justin could speak better to that as far as the landlord goes than I could. I don't know.
That's a,
Landlord's probably a no-go. His name's Raymond, so he's a gentleman who's pretty tight, and he's the one that owns the bar, the All Stars Bar, and I think another one in Keizer here, and then a couple more throughout Salem. That's one of the things that that I'm dealing with as far as I have a sign, an actual neon sign that's on the side of my building, but the Urban Renewal Project in all its glory planted a tree dead center to it when it was a little tree. Little tree. Now it is a big tree, and that sign has disappeared. So why I mentioned earlier that no one sees me. That tree has done a pretty effective job at camouflage over a very nice sign, which is why some of those things I had out there were until we figure out what we got going on with the tree and how to handle it. That's kind of where we're at.
And I've had this conversation with Justin, and I actually have stood out there across the street, and that tree, it doesn't just camouflage, it truly does block the sight of that tree, of that sign. So I have had a conversation with the landlord, with the building owner. I've indicated that we need to look at maintenance and how we can look to maintaining that landscaping. And he has promised me that we'll have an ongoing dialogue about that. The difficulty is, well, it just shows you how complex these issues can be. So we have competing interests. Our urban renewal program sought to plant green trees along River Road. Now, that has some competing interest with just wide open visual access to buildings and everything. Then we have an individual like Justin who is struggling with the cost of relocating. He's actually investigated the cost of relocating the sign, and it's about $1,000 just to move the sign out from behind the tree. Now, I don't know, Justin actually, because he's on that end tenant, he would have the option to have a secondary sign on the side that faces that driveway into Safeway. And I don't know if you've investigated that at all. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be illuminated, but it obviously is up to your agreement with your landlord. So it just shows you how complex all of the issues can be. We want We want Justin's business to be identified. We want people to know that there is a market there and they have that option. At the same token, we don't want to cut down the trees along River Road so that everybody has visual access. So we have to find these solutions, and that's why we're proposing relaxing the standard on a portable sign so that there would be at least that opportunity. So that's the thought process we have gone through with this. And Jim, I know where you're coming from, that long history. I know that you remember that sign clutter, and I know that's a sensitive issue for you. But at the same token, we have an individual here that's kind of in the crosshairs of these competing interests. So that's why we're proposing what we are.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Any more questions by the commission? As somebody who grew up in Keizer, you talk about clutter. Yeah, it was a mess. The Taco Bell sign, I lived on fashionable Main Avenue, so I know the war and the impact that had on the neighborhood. There's one thing very unique about Keizer when it comes to signage. As we've talked with, most of the businesses we're talking about is River Road. Right behind those businesses start our neighborhoods. And so I'm glad in your talk at the beginning, you're talking about the whole community, not just River Road. And I want to clarify, like his area, the homeowners associations or business agreements can be much more restrictive on signage, and we have no control over that, correct? Okay.
That's correct.
Jim?
These are just general questions that you're asking?
Mm-hmm.
I've got two things. One is on page 1 about the geometric figures. When you mentioned what would be the standard geometric figures. Thank you. Regarding geometric figures, you mentioned that they would be the standard geometric figures. Is that, I don't know what, are there
They're
like
whatever I say,
fractal
Jim.
designs that
They're
someone
whatever I
would say
say.
is a standard geometric figure?
Yeah, it's a good point. We've had that conversation as to if we need to have an addendum to what all options are. Obviously, the other conversation that may be had here is whether or not that's the appropriate approach at all, or if it's tough. In the world of computers, it's pretty easy to calculate area and sign submittals. Where it gets more difficult is where it's that mom and pop who are putting up their own sign, or not a professional sign company that has engineers on staff.
Yeah.
So the idea is that it would be more standard. It would be circles. It would be triangles. It would be any kind of rhombus or four-sided figure, or any kind of figure. I did, I was a decent math student. I was okay with conic sections and geometry, so I kind of like the challenge of the math problems. But anything I can break down and calculate is my thought. But
So calculate the area of a dodecahedron.
Yeah.
I'd have to break that down into some triangles and squares. It's
Just a
that's the way it
comment
is.
about
Yeah. No,
if staff thought what is in this version is good, then fine, or if you want to do something with it, that's fine.
No, I received that, Jim. We did kind of have that conversation. We probably need to tweak that a little and specify.
So on page 2, where the electronic message signs get to be on a wall, I thought that was really good. Going back a little farther, let's see, change in sign face alone. Okay, so on the non-conforming signs and the amortization stuff, where it's talking about no alteration or replacement of any non-conforming sign should be allowed. The current language saying a change in sign face alone is not, or is allowed without requiring compliance. So I'm glad to see that is staying there. The page 8, Down at the bottom, about abandoned signs, it's sub D as in Delta. And it talks about changing, I guess, 30 days to 120 days. And then, and the entire sign structure or structure shall be removed within 12 months. So if a business goes out of business or moves out, then they would need to shall be removed, all signs for a business shall be removed within 120 days. Does that mean all wall signs and the poles of pole signs, everything has to be gone?
I only am changing the time frame to make it a little longer. So technically, yes.
Okay, and then I guess the entire sign structure would have to be gone within 12 months, but presumably the space would be reoccupied within 12 months and whatever post and structure
I mean,
around the sign
I
face.
think so. I think that always happens. I don't think Kwang Chao Chinese food burned down
Yeah, okay.
11 years ago or anything. I mean, yeah.
Okay,
No, I mean, honestly, Jim, that's a really good question. I didn't propose any changes to that language other than just the time frame because I saw that 30 days and I'm like, that's ridiculously short. If we'll allow somebody to have an A-frame or a banner up for 120, if a business, is gone, you got to give a little bit of time for those folks to move out of their space and get their stuff out. We actually have a business on River Road right now that went out of business, changed location, but is stuck in a lease and ended up with some signage on a property. And so we actually had this conversation of, well, they're in a lease, they're paying for the space, the business isn't operating there. Is that really an abandoned sign then? So, but yeah, right now what that language says is what it says.
yeah, okay.
So.
Page 9, down at the bottom, E is in echo, development signs. One sign not over 32 square, well, this is signs generally permitted. One sign not over 32 square feet and located at each street entrance to a residential subdivision or development. So that sounds like development. That's kind of anything on any piece of property. So any piece of property gets a 32 square foot sign?
I think the intent is residential subdivision or development, meaning residential subdivision or residential development. So for apartments, is that what the intent was?
PUDs.
And PD, think inland shores.
Right. So perhaps
Maybe sticking,
Jim just read it differently, so you might want to just repeat residential.
yeah, okay. The next page on 10 regarding, at the top, regarding window signs and a type, the way it is now is signs generally permitted are window signs for commercial and industrial buildings. And then the new language would be that windows could have no more than 50% of the surface area in signage. And I guess that typically, to me, is signs on the inside that are affixed to the inside of the window. And so I thought I would just raise this so the commissioners are aware. And I'm thinking, does our staff need to worry about, I guess, having a permit for a window sign and then knowing what the size of the window is and knowing the sign is less than 50%? And for me personally, I don't care if an entire window is filled up with signage. And if this were to allow 50% of a window to be filled, if the sign is centered on a window, then there's a border around and the sign is in the middle and it only covers 50%, but you still can't see in. So why not just not have a 50% standard? And if somebody wants to cover their entire window with a sign, at least for me, that would be okay.
What I see popped into my mind as Jim was reading this is in the holidays, a lot of businesses get artists that do their whole window in holiday scenes. This seems that would be more than 50% of the front window, wouldn't it?
It could be.
Could be.
Yeah, I know
I-
window
I like
signage is an
seeing those
issue, and
things.
some cities, they require a percentage and others don't.
Yeah, I
limit
think more
any-
commonly what we've seen with window signs is we see the clings at the fast food restaurants, or for example, Jersey Mike's is the entire windows covered with the sandwich picture, or down the street by Burger King where the tanning place used to be. I don't know if it still is, but all of those windows are completely covered, and it's kind of hard because as a planner we have a 50% glazing requirement for uses along street frontages to create storefront feels. And so that's kind of where that's where that's kind of coming out of, is we've not had an ability to not allow that. And both Nate and I, we go to these great lengths with architects to argue how much glazing they have to provide, and then if all that glazing is additional signs that doesn't function as glazing, it seems like it's in conflict with our development standards of the code. So that's where it's at, or that's where the 50% was. That was a number that was just kind of grabbed out of the air, though. I mean,
Then Gary?
I was going to bring up the Jersey Mike's because to me, that sign acting as a billboard, it's kind of telling people, you don't come in this way. To me, that's a bad thing because that's the storefront. Even if it technically isn't the main entrance, you're kind of creating this wall off. Whereas if you had a window that's 50% or less. Oh, I thought I had that thing on. Darn it. If you had a wall, some visual, less obstruction into the business, whatever it is, it seems to be more inviting to people.
Can I say something on that?
Go ahead. Yeah, you'll have to come up and identify
I didn't
yourself.
want to interrupt, but I didn't get to speak earlier, so I'd pipe in.
Go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Bob Shackelford. I am the incoming president for the Chamber of Commerce, and been a business owner for several businesses, including up and down River Road and different cities. On your banners or your billboards on the windows, so new technology has came a long ways. So a lot of those, they're not solid. You see out of them, but you don't see in them, and a lot of businesses use them as sunshades. To me, they're a lot more attractive when I'm sitting down in Jersey Mike's to be able to see rather than having roll down, Venetian blinds or something that collects dust anyway. They are advertising, but I don't know if you guys realize that you see out of them, you don't see in them. So technology's gone a long ways. Let me see, Brandon Bay's place, the chiropractic center. It's got all the windows, you can see out of them, but you can't see in them. So it's nice for heat and the sun. Now, I have the same landlord as this gentleman does, so I do everything, including the landscaping, and clean our facility as well. But I am on the west side, so my building gets a lot of sun in the morning, and I have to close the little blinds. Well, those, I don't know what they're called, window coverings or advertising, or pretty much just a sunshade. So a lot of places are getting them nowadays. Like you said, the tanning place, they probably do it because of the sun, because when that sun goes down in the west, they are just getting a lot of sun. So that's probably more for shade. Is it work for advertising as well? Yeah, it's great. They're not cheap, I know that. And then to address some of the issues, like you said before, if it's not broke, don't fix it. I see a lot of sandwich boards, not too many. I'm kind of a pet peeve on shrubbery and visibility from trees. Like he said, we planted a tree when it was a seedling, and now it's probably 10 feet tall, and you can't even see the building.
It's more than 10.
So maybe it's something that needs to be addressed in the way of, let's do some, I love business guys. And I don't know how many of you guys have owned businesses, but it's not easy. When we got all kind of code enforcement, which is good, but when you start racking up fees and, if someone comes along and says, okay, your building has to have channel letters on it, no box signs anymore, not saying they're gonna do that, it's very expensive. That's a very expensive cost, and a lot of businesses, especially mom and pop places, it's hard to stay open, you know. So my business is different. I sell real estate. So I have one sign out front. If someone wants to find me, they'll usually Google it and they'll find my address. Whereas he gets a lot of drive-by for retail where people might want cigarettes or pop or whatever, and he gets the flow of traffic for retail. Now, we all have to advertise our business as well. We can't just expect the reader board out front with our name on it to draw in our traffic. There's a lot of advertising costs, there's newspapers, sky's the limit on advertising. We get it in the mail every day, we get it in the paper. You know, I advertise all over the place. Is it successful? It's a lot of money, but you know, it takes just advertising as well as that little reader board sign out front that most people don't even pay attention to or take their eyes off the road. So maybe the issue would be some tree trimming. So anyway, thanks you guys for listening to me.
Thank you.
As long as you say trim.
Yeah, trimming. Gary, you had your hand up.
It's pretty much been discussed.
So,
Jim.
continuing on, page 14, the secondary building wall stuff. I thought that was great because there can be times where, yeah, you got a sign on your front, but if anybody's approaching from any other direction, you have no clue what that building has in it. So, signage on a second wall, or even for me on a third wall, would be fine. And I think this one is probably something for Shannon. On page 16, middle of the page, under Delta 2, vehicle directional signs. So with the content stuff, it's like, okay, vehicle directional signs are allowed, and some people might think, oh yeah, I know what is going to be there, but in fact, a vehicle directional sign, you can put any message on it you want. And
Yeah, I remember thinking, but I never talked to staff, that perhaps we could, I'm trying to see if the incidental signs cover that, or if we need something in addition. It would be better not to have that. It is content.
Okay, because
driven.
my kind of follow-up was, and you know, all this political signs during elections and things, with this Reed versus Gilbert and previous Supreme Court decisions, they're really, in my estimation, not hurting government, they're hurting people, business people and individual citizens more than anybody else. And so if we have a vehicle directional sign that can have any message on it that anybody wants to put on it, why couldn't we have some of the language in the current code be retained that talks about having some extra signs during an election period? Again, we wouldn't say what message has to be on those signs. It could be any message.
I would love to talk about that for a couple hours.
But
Shane
there must be a
Shane-
weakness in that.
Maybe no one else would. Shane and Nate and I discussed that. In fact, Shane, I think it's in this article here.
Yep.
And I'm not sure I agree with it, but I understand the argument and would rather be safe than sorry, is that anything that refers to the election period is an indication of content. I think that that's going a bit far, but that's what the article says. And I think the real question is, how do you want to deal with the substitute, and I'm going to let Shane describe that, because if you haven't already, for doing away with the whole election sign part. And by the way, the Reed versus Gilbert case, I'm really glad we're making some of these changes. I've been asking about making these changes before Reed Gilbert came out. But you know, that, and I don't want to take a lot of time, but it's just, I had forgotten until I reread it yesterday. You know you're starting off bad when you have a category entitled ideological signs. So that's the that's the town of Gilbert started down that path, and the church's sign fell under a third category, and they had a lot less sign rights than somebody else that had a different message. None of our code has ever gone that far in terms of being, I mean, putting a bullseye on your back, which is what this town did. But it's still worth taking a look at making these changes that Shane has worked on. I would agree, Jim, with your one on the vehicle directional signs. I think that there's a bigger issue on the elections one. What you described, we did kick around. I'm not sure I'd want to go that way, but I mean, that would be one of the options.
Because with the directional signs, to me, kind of what you have in mind is these little small, I don't know, 1 foot or
Entrance.
18-inch by 18-inch things that's out by the front
out.
property line, and it kind of has an arrow so you know where to go in.
Right.
And even if it doesn't an arrow and it has the name of the company or their logo, well, at least you know that that's what they intend, whether it's the logo or an arrow, who cares?
Yep.
And so.
No, historically, Jim, that's you know, just drive River Road, Dutch Brothers,
Yeah, I don't have
Nancy's,
a problem with these little
McDonald's,
directional
Taco Bell,
signs. It's
pretty much
the
everyone.
size that is more important, and whatever message they have. I mean, they could say, go to our competitor 1 block farther down the road. Whatever content they want to put on it, they can do it. So, I'm trying to find a way to allow more signs during election time that won't drive people crazy who want to put up more signs, and the city staff who would hear complaints that there are too many signs.
Well, if we can take just a second to explain, the proposal that you have here is just simply a sign is a sign, and you're limited to 1 sign, and and it doesn't matter whether there's an election on or not. Now, the reality is that's going to be an enforcement nightmare. There's not a single person on this planet, if they have the propensity to put out a yard sign for a political candidate, there's a heck of a lot more than 1 political candidate on a ballot. Now, other cities have taken the approach that they limit, they create this calendar date, and I suppose we could say from the period of October 1st through November 15th, which in essence is about what we're talking about, you are allowed 3 signs. Okay, I mean, it seems, I mean, that's how some jurisdictions have dealt with it, is just basically designate a calendar period and said, you can have a few more signs during that period. Honestly, the intent, well, if you want to be extremely content neutral, including this opinion that even if you refer to a specific event, that's content.
Time period, you mean?
Well, event of an election.
Oh, right.
So the proposal is just simply eliminating the category. The reality is, it's going to be a nightmare. So your discussion, your recommendation, your feelings about do we? I'm uncomfortable with simply saying during this period, it's a free-for-all, because I know, based on my conversations with specific individuals, that there are some commercial establishments that will take advantage of that situation. And will just simply say, hoo-hoo, you know, and I'm uncomfortable with that, because that's not consistent with the goals and the intent of our sign code is to try and basically allow an even approach and preserve visual access, eliminate sign clutter, keep our community something that we're proud of. So I'm struggling with that category specifically.
Well, I've had people with political signage say, well, there's the primary in May, and they don't stop campaigning from May to October, so why not have signs out in effect all year long? And then there's folks who say, well, I'm collecting signatures for a ballot measure, And I can do that all year long for years on end. And so I need signage for that. And then there's the multiple candidate thing. By the time you have people running for national office and state office and county office and city office and fire district and soil and water conservation district and school district, well, the person could have 1,000 signs on their property. And so it's kind of like, well, okay, if we're going to get into that kind of detail, let's just default to what you were mentioning. You got a certain number of signs, and whatever it is, and all year long, that's what you get to have.
Well, I need to ask some questions that you might not have. What is Marion County Elections restrictions on sign?
Not,
Does
I'm not
Marion
aware
County,
that they have
I-
any that would apply within Keizer. I mean, it's a sign code regulation.
Yeah.
I guess I have no idea whether the Secretary of State Elections Division has any. I would doubt that they would have any substantive kind of sign code, it'd be more on funding, I would think.
Yeah.
I actually believe that they have a specific information bullet that says you have to check with the local jurisdictions regarding sign code requirements.
And some cities and counties,
Okay,
they
that's-
get
thank you.
the list of all the campaign managers, and they send out a standard letter to all those campaign managers.
We do.
Saying, if you're going to put signs in our jurisdiction, talk to so-and-so, and here's the number and email address.
That's exactly what we do.
Michael?
I have a few questions too, but I'll start with continuing on this conversation. So with the content, remember what the bowling alley had on their thing, and there was some displeasure with some people with what they, would that have fallen under the content, or is that because they already have a sign, they can put whatever, changeable letters?
So the message you're referring to was something they put on their changeable copy sign.
Correct.
They put on their sign. We did not, that was not part of our discussion. We can't read signs. So, yeah, that was just simply a personal choice and a personal reaction.
Okay. With the geometry of the signs, is the driving factor efficiency of how things are put on, or for companies, especially these multinational or interstate companies, they have their logos and
Yeah, I think that was hot mic right there. So there has been several businesses that we've worked with for sign area calculations over the years. Again, 2 rows of letters and massive amounts of dead space. And if somebody chose to go a sign over here and a sign over here, you don't calculate all the dead space in between. And then looking at kind of the model codes and frankly, most of the other sign codes we looked at for area did more than just a parallelogram and a triangle. And that's what our code currently said for things that were not like a box sign. So those channel letters or a message.
Think target.
Think target has a circle, like pi r squared. It's not a hard one. We all learned it in grade school how to calculate it. My code currently would say no, it's a square. You got to calculate it as a square, and so there's a huge difference in the overall square footage that's allowed, and so we just feel it's more fair and more accurate to what the actual area is. Area is a quantified number, just like volume. So if you're calculating area that isn't area, it just, I don't know. That's kind of the thinking behind it.
okay. With the nits versus things, does the new light technologies they have out there push us into one or another?
So when we were at the national conference, I went to a class that was about signs and Gilbert Reed and all these different things, and I actually left pretty excited because I was like, oh sweet, because nits has always just been dumb to me. Like I don't like it. It's confusing. I don't even know what it means. And I thought, oh, this is great. Foot candles is more normal lighting standards. You can use a lux meter, which is a lot cheaper. And really, so I thought, oh, maybe this is a good move for us. And so I looked into it a little bit, read basically difference of opinions. I don't know that there's one that's right. It's pretty wild because the people that say knits and the people that say foot candles use the exact same lighting engineer, Dr. Lewin, who's established the number that is like what they look at as visual light trespass. And it's truly like a 0.3, what is it, foot candles per whatever. I can't remember what not an engineer, sorry guys. But it's the exact same number, it's just how it's measured. So whether or not your knits or your foot candles, I think the end result is going to be very similar. Now, the gentleman, Mr. Carpenter, he sent an email and he said, oh, it's going to be lower, by maybe as much as a third from brightness. What's hard is when you look at how people are measuring the foot candles, and he cites that over 250 jurisdictions nationwide have moved to foot candles. Well, there's a lot more than 250 jurisdictions nationwide that have EMCs. So it's new, and I'm a little skeptical, because by nature I'm always a little skeptical as to why they're pushing foot candles so hard. But the thing I don't like about foot candles on the surface, just the little bit I've done, and again, the jury's out in my own mind. I think it's really probably 6 of one, half dozen of another. But the way that you have to measure the foot candles measurement is you have to take an ambient light reading. So sign has to be off or all black, and then you turn the sign on. And it's taken from a specified distance and a specified height. And so it's basically measuring how much additional sign light is being put into the system. So, Salem's proposed language is to measure it at 100 feet away from the sign at 5 feet off the ground, a half hour after sunset. So from a staffing level, it's kind of a problem for us. Other than planning commission nights, I'm supposed to go home at 5. So certain times of the year, no problem. But other times of the year, we're paying somebody overtime to go out and measure signs. So, but yeah, so that is, honestly, Michael, I don't feel great about giving you a ton of information on it because I personally haven't had enough time to delve into it deep enough to really have a strong opinion on it. Lux meters are way cheaper than knit guns, and they don't require a lab to calibrate them. We may or may not have a knit gun here at the city of Keizer. We don't. But we've never ran into a huge problem. Now, if we did, I'm not sure what we would do. So
We would rent one.
no.
Go to a pawn shop.
Okay, I kind of like to move the commission along. You're wanting a little bit of direction. We're not going to deliberate or make any decisions tonight because this is going to carry over for you to get more and for us to get more input from the community and such. But from what I've heard so far tonight, you're on the right track. And I like the idea of the reader boards with a more opportunity for everyone in the community, whether it's McNary High School or whoever, to put more information on. I'm also chair of the traffic safety, and I know study after study doesn't really show that is a
Safety.
traffic safety or distracted driving issue per se. So, and I hate to say this, but we should be somewhat in compliance with our next door neighbors, meaning Salem. Yeah, well, our businesses do a certain level compete with ones in Salem. And I think our role is to try to make sure the playing field is as level as possible, but to protect our community. So I'll open the forum to any of the other commissioners or any questions you have of us as we move forward.
So on that last point, one of the things I did want to stress, and I'm not sure I did it effectively, is from the very beginning, as we regulated these signs, it was always a prohibition on specific attention-getting kinds of signs. Back in the day, it was rotating signs, it was flashing signs, it was animated signs. All of those things were prohibited from the very beginning. And so, and that's what I'm trying to convey to you as we're wrestling with creating this context, that you've got to keep in mind that that has long been a standard of this community, is that these attention-getting methods, and even though technology changes, is something that was unacceptable at that time, and I don't think that standard has really changed to the community. Now, the reason we're suggesting what we are is we think that 60 seconds is still a static sign, that as you drive down the road, you're not going to see multiple images, and that it will be a static sign. It will not be attention-getting. And that's why we've chosen this kind of time period. So,
Gary?
yeah.
Essentially, I like what I see here, and I think moving to 1 minute is reasonable and practical. It's not going to create distractions, and it's going to allow 15 messages every quarter of an hour, which can be beneficial to the community when you talk about Fire District, McNary, and even businesses, for example, when someone brought up the police funding. You know, a lot more people would be able to see that. So I think that's reasonable. I don't think it jeopardizes or enhances any distractions to general driving, which is important, so.
Michael?
I would still push the time, the switch time, or however you want to phrase it, a little bit longer. I think, you know, a minute sounds reasonable, but it could also be, as you're going along River Road, you see the sign and you're kind of knowing it's going to turn, but if something seems more static, you're not going to, yeah, you could be, you're like, okay, what's it going to say? Versus, you know, it's something a little longer, it's a little more static, you're less likely. Whereas the 8 seconds that Jonathan had mentioned, you know, I see that as you're trying to get as much turnover because you know people are going to be going by fast, and so you want to I'm not saying it's a safety issue, I'm just saying that short, really compressed time is really just you're trying to get as many things in front of someone as they're going by fast. So, you know, I was thinking more like 2 to 4 minutes, you know, nothing drastic, but something a little longer.
Kyle, did you have any comments?
I do have
Yeah,
one,
okay.
since I've been quiet the whole
okay.
time. I was just wanting to comment about measuring the content. There's software out there now for free that you can read PDFs, so that's not an issue. I'm sure you've seen that.
Oh, you're talking about area calculation?
Yeah, the area calculations, that can be done easy with just a picture on a page, and pull it up and calibrate and measure. So that's not a problem. You know, I remember back when the signs were huge, and the problems with that. Things do look a lot better, and even when I put my sign up, I made it smaller than it had to be, or than it could be, because I just thought it fit the building. And I think that having things, you know, smaller or less intrusive is better for our community, because you know, we're not a huge, you know, we don't have a huge area. We got River Road, and it's pretty tight. So I you know, putting us at the same place as Salem, I don't necessarily think is right. That's just, you know, my opinion.
I appreciate it.
So I just wanted, I guess that's all I had to say about that.
Josh?
You know, on the flashing, I don't think the 60 seconds versus 8 seconds is going to make too much of a difference, really. You know, and you do notice it in Salem, the 8 seconds. You can see it at stop lines.
Is your mic on?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It is. You know. But I think 60 seconds, not the 2 to 4 minutes.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear that.
The 60 seconds instead of the 2 to 4 minutes.
Oh, I see.
Is that enough for you guys to?
Well, one of the key pieces is going to be this amortization discussion, and in my discussions with Shannon, it really is a complex issue. And the reality is we do not want to jeopardize we don't want to foreclose our ability to actually remove some of these signs should there be a court case or something that comes down the line. And the proposal here would simply just say they're non-conforming. Our current language says that they are illegal because they have not been removed. And I do not want to jeopardize our ability to address the issue in the future. We know that that was a huge issue. We've gotten them down to, I think, a total of 5 signs in the entire town. And I think the reason we don't hear more concerns about it is because there are so few left. But, so that's why it's really important to give, I've been trying to give Shannon some breathing room because I know his plate is really full. And so it's going to be important to hear what he has to say.
Go ahead, Chad.
Thank you.
Oh, I just wanted to mention to the chair, before you wrap up, you probably should formally continue the hearing to
Yes, sir.
the next meeting. Okay.
Gary?
Earlier on, Shannon, you were talking about the amortization, and I think I heard you say that was dealing mostly with the large billboard type signs. That was part of what prompted that to be set in place.
Well, not really. I mean, the process to actually draft our own sign code was initiated because of the billboard by Taco Bell. But the amortization period applied to all permanent signs. Actually, there was a 90-day amortization period for temporary signs too, because we said temporary signs are not as valuable. You need to fix those in 90 days. For permanent signs, it was such an investment, that's the term amortization. It was felt unfair and almost illegal taking to say, oh, by the way, we're changing the sign code and your $10,000 sign has to come down in 3 months. I mean, oh gee, I just put it up a year ago. So that was the period. I researched that way back when 7 years was a defensible one. But back to your question, it was not specifically for billboards. I'm not aware of any signs because I can't believe 27 years went by that fast. But I'm not aware of any signs other than the 5 billboards remaining that would be illegal signs. They've turned over. I'm not aware of any. There may be.
There's a few.
Are there a few? So
Not
there's
for size, but for flashing.
not for size or
JC's
location.
JC's has chaser lights. Boucher's has the
Yeah.
flashing diamond.
They're
Those are
old.
not. Yeah, they're grandfathered.
They never switched.
Nope.
Oh, is that interesting?
They've always kept it
Well,
just the way
there
it
you
is,
go.
so they
I
could
mean,
have it.
we still have a few signs that are illegal besides the billboard signs. So
Okay, because that was really part of my question, because you'd mentioned the billboards, and I wanted some examples of non-billboard
yeah.
and how they apply. So
I only know if
Boucher's-
there's so like Boucher's time and temperature is actually also technically illegal because they don't have a conditional use for it, but is already there. So
Centuries.
I'm sorry. They moved that from the old building. Is that the same?
no, I think
It's
that it-
newer.
I think
No,
it was-
it's newer. You're right. Yeah.
But the diamond sign that flashes and then the chaser lights at JC's, those are not sign types that we would allow as new signs today because they'd be flashing or whatever. The chaser effects are hour prohibited, but they're considered, well, yeah, they're non-conforming signs.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and continue this text amendment, section 2.308 on signs to our September 13th, 2017 meeting. And I'd like to thank everybody that testified tonight and gave us some input. Thank you very much. Moving on our agenda, new old business staff report. Thank you both. Nothing?
I know. You know, it's like it's a surprise that I have this on the agenda every month.
Hard to believe. Oh, again?
Oh,
Leadership series? Okay. Oh, okay. Yes. Oh, okay. And this is October 13th, 27th.
so Debbie, is your mic on?
October 13th. Oh. Oh, that's payable. October 19th. Okay, I have to double check. Can I email you to say?
You can call me or email me if you want me to add you to the list, or you can pull it out before you leave tonight.
Okay.
So as far as staff update, just so you know, as far as the state of permits, there's a lot of activity out at Keizer Station, Area A. We have Cafe Yum has now broken ground. Hop Jacks, which is another, I think it's a brew pub kind of restaurant, located across the street from Outback, has broken ground. The hotel is now out of the ground, and they're working on it diligently. We've also been in discussions with the property owner adjacent to Keizer Permanente about amending the master plan so that there can be an additional building built. They built Keizer Permanente as at a fraction of what was approved and want to basically bifurcate the building, so they have two buildings. Even though currently there's 120,000 square feet that's approved for that site with all of its parking, et cetera. And they built like 20,000 square feet, something on that order. As far as Area B, we are continuing to work with the proponent of a theater at Area B. They're in the final details of a lease negotiation. And we have seen conversation starters about elevations for what the theater might look like. And so we've been having those dialogues as well. So there's a lot of activity going on. And hopefully that will continue.
Council liaison.
Thank you. Can you hear me? This mic. Okay. I have actually a lot of things since the last time you guys met last month. On July 17th, we had 5 public hearings. We were here till midnight. Hopefully we won't do that again. But
Wasn't my fault. Wasn't my fault.
Safeway was on there, and the city council decided that and remember, this is only a text amendment. It's not their permit. It's not their building. Everything still has to go through our planning department. But the city council did approve for them to build a 425 square foot building in conjunction with the gas station. So that was one of them. Other than that, we had the parks development fee at $4 per month and the public service fee at $4 per month, which will actually bring on 5 new police officers. And then, of course, we did the amendment to the Keizer Station Area B for the theater, so we could allow those to proceed. We also approved your Keizer Development Code, Section 2.303, off-street parking, so that was approved. This last week, we approved the hour change for the medical marijuana clinics here in Salem, in Keizer, so they could be competitive with the stores in Salem, as we talked about before, that competitiveness. We had National Night Out, even though it was 105 degrees. There was a lot of people there. We visited a lot. We had a great time. And then there's something coming here in a few days, in about 10 days. Don't want to mention it, but it is the eclipse. As you know, I'm kind of spearheading that, voluntold, down at Keizer Rapids Park. Our camping is nearly full, but we are looking for volunteers to bring on maybe a 2 or 3 hour shift at a time for the weekend. If you have nothing better to do, walk or bike down to the park and help us out a little bit. We want to keep it clean. We want to keep it safe. We want to make sure they have water and, you know, and all that. And we did ban smoking in the parks. I think all parks, did we all, Shannon? All parks in the city of Keizer, right now, there's a no smoking ban. So.
Just for the viewing public, what kind of duties would you anticipate the volunteers to be doing?
Well, we were gonna drive around selling bottled water. We need to go around and pick up trash with, you know, the trash picker upper things. We want to make sure that we're going to strictly enforce the no smoking. We're also going to strictly enforce the quiet time. We have to make sure that only cars that come in and out are permitted, with the parking spots for the parking spots, and then keep the parking separate for the amphitheater free concerts, which, by the way, we'll still have free concerts on Friday and Saturday night and a paid concert on Sunday night. And there'll be food down there, and of course the entertainment. CERT will be down there. I'll be down there. Yeah, lots of things though. If you go to the KeiserEclipse.com website, it actually has a list of duties and responsibilities and some sign-up times for everybody. So.
Just an FYI, I'm supposed to be meeting with the CERT people on Friday.
Okay.
Because we have 3 bicycles from the traffic safety. They're going to use bicycles for the patrol, and we're going to fit.
Fantastic.
Yeah, because we got 3 giant mountain bikes in the locker that haven't been used, and fit them for helmets on Friday. So.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. You know, CERT has really gonna bring some people down there to help us out. So.
Movement in a motor vehicle may be a little more difficult at times. And
Yeah,
there's
especially
study
with all
after
the people
study
there.
shows that a lot of emergency and other situations, the
Love the bike.
bicycle is the way to get around.
Yep.
So
We'll have a
and we
couple
have
gears,
those
too.
3 just hanging there. So
Awesome. Yep. So, like I said, and of course, registration vehicles are going to be coming in probably till late, and so we want to man the registration booth. And then Sunday night's an all-nighter. Due to the fact that Salem opened all their parks, we anticipate we might have some issues. So we're going to have all-night shifts for people. Well, there'll be 2-hour shifts at a time, but all night long. So if you can be a night bird and stay up with us for a couple hours, I'd appreciate your help. That's all I have. Thank you.
thank you. Josh, are you on deck?
I'm actually not. I thought it was on the 14th, but the 21st can't make it.
Does anybody want?
Somebody's on a bicycle.
Yeah, no kidding.
Although,
First, are you guys gonna
Even?
have a meeting that night?
Yes, we are having a meeting on the 21st, that night.
so, you know, sorry, because we are continuing the hearing, I can give that report. So,
You get points in heaven.
no, it's my skin gets to stay intact. So I will just simply convey to the council that you have continued the hearing to your next meeting. It would be, I mean, it'd be crazy to have somebody fight that traffic and everything else on that day. So,
Okay,
that day,
that's good.
that day.
And to reiterate, if anybody's interested in attending, let Debbie know as soon as possible, even tonight. And with that, Gary, before I.
Thank you. This is a question for staff. When the fuel station here at Shamo and River Road came up, there was a question about that whole overlay zone, and there was someone who had recently purchased the old Cascade Bank and was talking about drive-through, and, you know, they had a possible tenant. I know then we've had a traffic grant, I believe, came in, so you're occupied with that. But at what point do you realistically think that this planning commission will or should be looking at that entire overlay zone and how appropriate it is?
Why do you ask hard questions?
Because I figure if I ask hard questions, you will show how brilliant and
I see.
attentive you are.
Okay. Well, we do know that's an issue. We have long said that we want that overlay district examined in this grant process. Is it effective? Does it serve a purpose? Given everything that has happened and the development that has precluded future development, I'm looking at Mr. DeBlasi, that was one of the points he wanted us to consider. So that is a specific objective of that grant, is to look at whether we continue that overlay district or not. The challenge, and I wrestle with, and I have unease about, is the time that it takes to go through this process. We don't have a contract yet with ODOT, with the TGM program, Transportation Growth Management Program. But that's our objective. We want a comprehensive look. We want to look at not just that overlay district, but all of the entire corridor. Are we getting the best that we can? Can we incorporate more flexibility to allow better mixed-use development along that corridor? That's our goal. That's what we are working towards.
So that, I appreciate you clarifying. Maybe I heard it and forgot it, but that overlay zone was going to be part of this whole grant process. So thank you.
With that, I end the meeting. Thank you very much.